Oh no, NIH study sections are on pause briefly while the new administration comes to power. If you follow social media, you'll see a lot of consternation about the Trump administration's decision to put a pause on NIH-funded travel and NIH-funded study sections. People are really worried what's going to happen to science. But once again, in a Trump administration, we're living in a sky-is-falling mentality. This is not that big a deal. Let me point out the facts. Number one, some people say that because of the pause in NIH travel, that they're going to miss out on some meetings or their time was wasted because they were already in transit. They're not giving you the broader perspective. Millions of human hours are spent each year writing NIH grants that are unfunded. The greatest waste of scientific capital is writing unsuccessful NIH grants. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, the NIH is surely giving the grants out to the most meritorious science. No, there aren't. They've never studied whether or not their method of giving out grants is superior to any other method, including a modified lottery. They don't even know if this arduous, bureaucratic, time-consuming, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours process is better than just having a low bar cutoff and then randomly giving out the money. They've never done that experiment. They haven't studied scientifically the science of giving out research funding. It's even worse than that. NIH dollars come with massive indirects, which make researchers who have a lot of NIH dollars untouchable. Universities usually overlook their errors and keep them on faculty because they get a lot of cash. That cash is then laundered by universities, given back to them in unrestricted slush funds used for all sorts of purposes, including lavish travel and parties and going out for lab meetings. It's wasted. We don't know what happens to all that money. Worse, the NIH has funded low-value priorities. They went all in on the amyloid hypothesis for Alzheimer's. Where was the scientific research on other Alzheimer's-related pathways? And it turned out the amyloid hypothesis blew up in their face. Harold Varmus discovered RAS oncogene. He put $60 million in drugging RAS, which has led to the most mediocre drug approved by the FDA, sotorasib. It's almost an undruggable molecule. He invested so heavily because he had a personal interest. Everyone knows that the study sections are all politics. The reason why so many doctors didn't speak out against Anthony Fauci, particularly ID doctors, is that they were worried their grant money coming from NIAID would be jeopardized if they questioned this guy. So we have this you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours mentality running rampant in this space. And what about diversity? The whole creation of the DEI state at universities is in part due to NIH indirects. There are NIH diversity supplements that Trump has argued that are going to get cut. So, of course, naturally, a new administration with new priorities, an economist physician coming to power, will look at this in a very different way. And while he's doing that, there should be a pause on grants. It's not that big a deal. Science is not going to fall by the wayside. Universities have redundant budgets. By the way, many of these nonprofit universities have quite a profit. You should see the way they're acquiring local hospitals. It's not that big a deal. Now, some people say, well, what about that young, promising scientist who was going to have a career by going to a conference and networking? I think this doesn't really happen. There's not that many careers created by networking. Careers are built by doing high-impact publications. I mean, there's no way around it. And the reality is that the federal government cannot be a welfare state for upper-middle-class kids to do science research that's irreproducible, that has clear flaws, that has a biased research agenda, that caters to political preferences. On my YouTube, I talked about a study where they gave CT scans for lung cancer to homeless individuals. That's the last thing somebody homeless needs, a CT scan to look for lung cancer, an unproven screening test. By the way, it has no all-cause mortality benefit in Nelson and in LSD for them when they're homeless, okay? It is missing the forest for the trees. So much NIH research cannot be reproduced. There have been studies by the Reproducibility Initiative, Brian Nozick, where they had a 50% reproducibility rate in the most highly cited research. NIH is in shambles. The scandal isn't that there's a pause. The scandal is that we're given $50 billion, $47 billion year over year to an organization that has no accountability. People fire back at me and they say, well, NIH research has led to cures. I don't dispute that. Of course it's led to cures, but it's a pretty leaky bucket. You always have to move money in a leaky bucket, but this bucket's got nothing but holes. Of course there's a little water left in the bucket when you move it. Some of the research is valuable, but a lot of it is waste. And we owe it to the public to eliminate the waste. You can't tax a school bus driver or a plumber and take their money and give it to this research apparatus and not deliver any products for them, to only engage in sort of a cronyist research agenda. I'll give you one anecdote. About 10 years ago, I think I had an NIH cooperative group funded research project approved to get their data and run an analysis. It's 10 years later and they never gave the data to me. Why? Because even though it's public data paid for with taxpayer money, even though I was a vetted researcher who jumped through all their hoops, at the last minute they decided it didn't do enough for them. I mean, maybe they didn't like me, or maybe the research didn't fit with their own ambitions, but they didn't give me the data. They shouldn't be allowed to deny a researcher, a professor at a university, access to public data for a public research question. I'm going to publish my results. They don't do that half the time. So many NIH R01s yield nothing. Very few publications. They get renewed and renewed. EcoHealth Alliance shows just how corrupt this rot goes. NIH is a rotten, rotten system. There's so much waste. Intramural waste, extramural waste. Now, some people said, what about the travel? They restrict you to stay at, low budget hotels, and you can't spend more than $40 a meal or something like that. Yeah, it's not great. But keep in mind, the question isn't, are you living a lavish travel life? Once upon a time, there were great offenses, and so they cut back. But the question is, even that little bit of money, does it yield returns? Sending all these people to these conferences where many times the presentations are garbage, they've not been vetted based on quality of presentation, I've talked about in so many other videos. There's so many problems to this. Is there a return on investment to the public, the taxpayer, from all these travel? And we all know where the cities we want to go are. Come on, let's not kid around. I want to go to San Diego. Look at the conferences that even I will go. I go to San Diego, but I never would go on an NIH dime. But I'm certainly going to go to Hawaii, but I'm not going to go to some of these terrible frozen hellhole cities in the wintertime. No, of course not. And I think that's why most people, they're not going to the conference. We all know what's going on at these conferences. Okay, but that's the least of my worries. The biggest waste is the indirects. The biggest waste is that they're not studying their processes and they're funding low-value science. And yeah, the travel is also, in my opinion, wasted. So pausing it to reassess all this, I think, is pretty legitimate. It's pretty legitimate. Okay, so once again, Trump comes to power and everyone screams, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Oh, Elon gave a Nazi salute. No, he didn't. He did not. And the sky is not falling. And you need to relax. And if you're going to act hysterical every time they do anything, you're going to be exhausted and you're going to be ineffective. You actually have no sense of what's good or what's bad policy. As far as I can tell, I think it's pretty good policy. Now I'm going to talk about some other policies and probably another video clip, but if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be one long video. All right. Other policies, gain-of-function research. Trump is going to ban gain-of-function research. Hey, guess what? That's a good thing, okay? It should be banned. What the hell are we talking about? Gain-of-function research, as far as I can tell, never led to a single cure and might have killed 20 million people in the COVID pandemic. So what are we talking about? Let's review the gain-of-function research history, shall we? 2011 is when it really starts. Anthony Fauci and colleagues wrote a Washington Post op-ed called I believe it's the title is a flu virus risk worth taking, or an influenza virus risk worth taking, supporting gain-of-function research where you mutate the coronavirus artificially to make it more transmissible and more lethal so that you can learn how to defeat it if it were to have those mutations. Now, in my mind, it's a dangerous business, as anyone knows who works in laboratories, because they don't always adhere to the highest safety and protective standards. And there's a risk that in muting the virus, you don't cure it, you actually infect yourself and cause a pandemic. That's the risk. Okay, but he talked about a risk worth taking. In 2014, the Obama administration issued a moratorium on this gain-of-function virus research. Interestingly, EcoHealth Alliance, they applied for an NIAID grant, and they received their grant in 2014. Most interesting to me is that the pardon that Biden gave Fauci goes retroactively to 2014, an interesting year. Some might contend, some might argue that that was the very year that he, perhaps intentionally, circumvented U.S. policy by outsourcing this research to China. Now, let me give you a kind of paradoxical thing. Ironically, maybe the ban on coronavirus research actually led to the pandemic because it forced Fauci to outsource it to a country with even more lax safety standards. You could argue it the other way, but maybe we shouldn't have been doing it at all, and he shouldn't have outsourced it at all. Okay, that's the more safer argument. That's the argument I favor. So, goes over there, and may or may not have had a lab leak, but I think The likely answer is it did have a lab leak. Many federal agencies hold that view. The furin cleavage site is extremely well adapted for human beings. Fauci, in his own emails, which have been subpoenaed from Congress, is in a very problematic place where he's really trying to push the natural origin theory. And some would argue that he's puppeting the Christian Andersen and colleagues in that Nature paper about the origin of the virus. So now comes along Trump. Pandemic, we all know what happened. Trump's going to ban gain-of-function research. Good. I think it should be banned, okay? If it wasn't banned before or circumvented, it should be banned now. Should Fauci have gotten the pardon? It's a tough one. I want the truth. I think he is guilty of perjury. See, here's the thing. I hear a lot of people talk, and the one thing that really baffles me is that folks on the liberal side of the spectrum will not admit he's guilty of perjury. He is gotta be guilty of perjury. And Rand Paul. Did the NIH fund gain-of-function research? No, he did not fund gain-of-function research. His own emails say, we are funding gain-of-function research. Okay, so he is lying about whether or not he funded it. Now, you might say, you could even argue that he should have funded it or all these things, or he thought he was doing the best thing at the time with what he do, but he did lie about it to Congress. I don't know how you get around that. He is guilty of perjury. He would have been convicted of perjury. Now, some people think it would have been difficult to convict him. I think that's true because all these people who make themselves political, even when they are in fact guilty of something, face difficulty in getting a conviction, but particularly where he lives. But I think that's a crime. I mean, you can't lie to Congress, okay? But he wasn't just given the pardon for 2021 and 2020 and 2022. He was given the pardon for 2014. That's interesting to me. That's the most interesting thing. So Trump wants to ban gain-of-function research. I'm going to move to a new video, but if you're watching this on YouTube, it's going to be one continuous thing. All right. MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report by the CDC. Some have called it, what was it called? It was called like a gem or a jewel or a holy of holy. I think it's called Holy of Holy in Catherine Rampole's WAPO piece. It's not the Holy of Holy, okay? It's one of the literally the shittiest journals. And I know you guys are going to write about my swear words in the comments, and don't you tell my mother again, because I don't want her calling me up on this. But it is so don't tell her. This is a shitty journal, okay? MMWR is a shitty journal. I can prove it to you that it's a bad journal. We did an empirical analysis of all of the mask studies that were published in MMWR during the pandemic, and they were not randomized controlled trials, natural experiments, and propensity score matched, inverse probability weighted observational studies. They were not high quality studies. They were anecdote, case report. Oh, there was a hairdresser in Marin County who one day she took care of somebody who was sick and she wore a mask and didn't get sick. It was the lowest level of science that they were publishing, not science, really propaganda to support their preconceived policy notions in MMWR for the whole pandemic. They are not a science journal. They are a pro-CDC journal. They'll publish things that support the CDC policy. See, it's very difficult to be both an agency that gives policy recommendations and an arbiter of scientific truth. Because the more you talk out your ass, the more you cherry pick data to support the shit you said. So that's the problem with MMWR. They're cherry picking data to support the things they're saying. They're not a neutral arbiter of science. And guess what? Because of the Trump administration, they missed an issue of MMWR. Oh no, where is the MMWR this week? I didn't get it. Oh no, I see Tom Frieden, the former CDC commissioner, CDC director who got himself in a bit of trouble. You can look about that. He was complaining about the missing MMWR. I'm not missing the MMWR. Nobody wants to read the MMWR. It is a low-tier publication. Missing it 1 week, not going to hurt anything, okay? Once again, the sky is falling mentality for everything Trump does. The sky is falling. Oh my goodness, the sky is falling. He pulled out of WHO, the last topic. And if you're watching this in clips, you got to go to the next clip. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be one video. WHO. I said in a prior video the U.S. should withdraw from WHO, and guess what? The U.S. has announced they're going to withdraw from WHO. I see Ashish Jha, the former White House COVID czar. He says that's not necessary. We can reform it. We can make it better. Hey, guess what? When you were working in the White House, Ashish, what were you doing? Did you make WHO better? Did you do any of those things? So why didn't you do it? This is a good question. Why didn't you do it when you had a chance? It's probably because he was on TV saying God gave us two arms. One arm was for the flu shot. The other arm's for the COVID booster. But guess what, Ashish? That left him with no arms to do shit about the WHO because his arms are all busted, so he didn't have any arms left. Okay, I kid. But he should have done something about it then. WHO failed, and it's good that the US pulls out. I know many people have written to me and they say WHO does good things. Absolutely, it does good things. But let me make one point, a point that the Democrats have made for a long time, that an existential threat, a threat beyond all the other threats we face, is if democracy is compromised. That's an existential threat. That's what the Democrats have said. That's what I think this decision is about, because here's why. The WHO has made itself an existential threat to American politics. Here is why. In a future situation, calamity, pandemic, or what have you, there is a new pathogen or something going on. Let's say it's not like COVID, it's something completely different. Okay, it's a new pathogen, extremely devastating. WHO is called in, US is called to action, everyone's heated. Let's say the Democrats come forward and they say, listen, the only way to stop this is to stop kids from interacting. We need a halt on playgrounds and school closure. We need that closed now, Democrat position. Republicans come out and they say, guess what? No way. We've done that before. That's horrible. Kids go, no. All you need is high dose vitamin B12. This time it's B12, obviously B12. That's the one this time. High dose, crank it up. Okay, let's say there's no actual evidence for either of these policies in my hypothetical scenario. Or switch them. Democrats are B12 and they're the closure, whatever you want it to be. But let's just say two groups of people, politically different, two different policy prescriptions, no evidence. Sound familiar? Yeah, okay. That's what we're in. WHO comes out, and WHO, do they run a study of the closure? Nope. Do they run a study of the B12? Nope. Do they use any science? Nope. They just decide that that year Tedros likes the Democrats, so they're buddy-buddy. So they're going to just come out and say, well, the closure one is right and the B12 is wrong, or vice versa. One year he likes the other party. They're right, their other one's wrong. Guess what? They are tampering with a political question. If it's an election year, the WHO is giving its imprimatur to one political party when they don't have science. They're not making a scientific decision because I've stipulated they're not running any studies. They're making a political decision. They're weighing in on which political party is right, quote unquote, without any science. That's a threat to democracy. That's like the WHO says, these are the right people, these are the wrong people, vote accordingly. And guess what? I made it a fictitious scenario, but it's not fictitious at all. That's exactly what they did. The WHO said lockdown was a necessary portion. It was something that you could do if you needed to do it. You could do if you needed to do it in Western free society, WHO. Level of evidence? Pulled out of their ass. They watched a video of Wuhan welding some doors. They got some ideas. WHO, you can close schools if you want to. Those two decisions did more to devastate the global poor than every single other good WHO initiative in the global poor, for the global poor. WHO did more damage from school closure than they can ever do in the next 25 years. That's point number one. Number two, they come along and they say, well, you know what, kids should mask. 6 years and up, you got to wear the cloth mask. Level of evidence? Again, they didn't do any studies to justify that. They made that up. That was a political question because science abdicated responsibility. Since nobody did a study of a randomized controlled trial of kids masking, it became a political question, and WHO took a political side with no science. That got potential to be an existential risk. They also want to have provisions in the guidance so that if the Director General, Tedros or whoever, declares a pandemic or other emergencies, all the states by de facto have to support those measures. Now, they're trying to walk that back and other people are pushing it, but that's part of their bylaw. So why do I say it? Now, if WHO, every time there was a dispute among political parties or among different scientists, ran the appropriate study concurrently with whatever they were doing, but at least ran the study, then we would have to view them as a scientific organization because they've run 0 studies of NPIs, 0 studies of distancing and masking, but yet nevertheless made recommendations. And those recommendations were partisan. They are making a political stance, and that is an existential risk. In a future election year, WHO might tip the scale if there is a health pandemic by saying one party is right or wrong. And maybe it's the Democrats this time, maybe it's the Republicans next time, but either way, we should not have that. America should be free to have our debates. We have our own agency, CDC, which is garbage, but can be reformed. We can't reform WHO without the external pressure of we out. And we out, and so is our $1.2 billion are out too. So WHO, bye-bye. You need to go. You need to go. Okay. So on all these issues, people are hand-wringing and crying. Well, guess what? It's no surprise you didn't support Trump, so you're not going to get what you want, all right? You're hand-wringing and you're crying, but everything you're saying makes no sense. A temporary pause on study sections, no big deal. I'm sure it will be a lot more. It's pretty difficult to defund all the useless research. We're still don't worry, we'll have useless research. You're going to have a lot of researchers are not going anywhere fast. Maybe we can trim 5% of them. If we trim 5%, it'll be a success. but it's very difficult to get all you useless researchers because there's so many of you studying CT scans for lung cancer or disparities. I want to talk for a second about disparities. If you're watching the YouTube video, it's one video. If you're watching the clips, it's separate. Disparities. I got into a bit of a spat online today where someone was defending cancer health disparities research. What did I say? My argument is simple. Do I think poor people do worse than rich people? Yes. Do I think black people, Hispanic people do worse than white people? Yes. In part, mediated because they tend to be poorer. So poverty is not good for having cancer. Being a minority is not good for having cancer. That's been shown 1, 2, 100, 20, 2,000, 1,000, 100,000. It's been shown 100,000 times in the literature. It's been shown over and over again. But what can you do about it? At Livingston, former JAMA editor said he kept asking authors to submit papers about what can you do about it, and they got nothing. They got no papers. We are funding so many researchers to study this problem ad infinitum. It would be like having a tobacco report every year. Tobacco causes lung cancer. Oh yeah, we know. What are you going to do about it? Okay, at least in tobacco, we did some things about it. With health disparities, we've done nothing about it. None of these researchers are doing anything credible about it. I was arguing with someone. I said, send me a paper that shows they've done something to improve the situation in any disparate group. And I had to ask like 3 times because he couldn't send a paper. Finally sends a systematic review. It's a systematic review out of 50,000 or 100,000 studies done in health disparities. They got like 9 that were positive, and they were all positive for soft endpoints. We did something and people reported better quality of life, but they didn't measure better quality of life for their whole life. They just measured it for like that brief period of time. So like one study that he linked to me was we gave people bananas and chicken and some food because they didn't have enough food at home, and they reported they were happy with the free bananas. Okay, but do they live longer, live better? Is it the best use of the money? Would they been better just give them the money direct? They're not asking any interesting question. And ultimately, it's not really a medical question. Somebody hungry, he has cancer. You don't need to go to a lot of years of med school to know maybe the guy should get some food. If he wants a banana, have a banana and some chicken. I mean, what are we funding? This doesn't need science, and that's the point I made. This is not a NIH science question. This is a political question about wealth, taxation, income, safety net, welfare state. This is about those questions. It's not a scientific question to give someone food or money, to give them a ride to the hospital. It's not a scientific question. And the scientists are not studying it in a very scientific way. They have short-term endpoints, flimsy studies. It's not really scalable. It's just a waste of money. And that's a tiny fraction of interventional studies. Most of it is just describing the problem over and over and over ad infinitum. When I go to the conference and I fly from like a place like San Francisco where everyone's going to the same conference, the entire overhead bin space is full of posters of health disparities. It's all pointless. Cancer health disparity work has helped 1,000 times more researchers in their career than it's ever helped black people. Black people don't get helped by this research. The researchers benefit, but poor people don't benefit. Hispanic people don't benefit. People who don't speak English don't benefit. The researchers benefit. It is the most garbage field where these people keep patting themselves on the back, often wealthy people themselves, patting themselves on the back, while poor people they're not doing anything for these people. And one last point. I just have to twist this a little bit to make this point. The same people, these people who do this research, were the most ardent proponents of school closure, the single most devastating thing for poor and minority people. They claim their whole life's work is to improve outcomes for poor minority people. They wanted school closure. And that did more damage to poor minority people than anything else ever done. It is the single most regressive action championed by the quote-unquote progressives. It proves that people, when they have their back against the wall, they don't give a shit about poor people and minorities. They just give a shit about themselves. And when they're scared of their own food, they don't give a shit who brings the Uber Eats to their house. They'll call some poor person, Uber Eats, close that person's kid's school, send their kids to they'll go eat at the French Laundry, send their kids to private school. That's what they did. So this whole elite liberalism is a complete hypocrisy. The pandemic showed it for what it is. And this disparities research has got to be defunded. Trump's going to defund it. He's already said he's going to defund it. They already have this bill crushing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It would be a great thing if medical schools did, in fact, actually try to get people in who had a tough upbringing. But guess what? They don't. They may be bringing in different faces and different races of people, but they still bring disproportionately people from the upper income brackets. They're not bringing in poor people. Poor people and kids of poor people are the most discriminated against in medical school. No field besides medicine is so bad at only admitting children whose parents also have the profession, like doctors. It is an incredibly nepotistic field. And all these DEI officers, universities, sucking up public cash, making us do useless modules, patting themselves on the back for trivial accomplishments, and they are not actually doing the hard work of going to places where people are poor, where people are trapped, and actually helping those people at an early stage start to hit the educational opportunities it takes to become a doctor someday. They're not doing that work. Roland Fryer is doing that work at Harvard, and many other sort of better thinking economists, but not these people who work at universities. And so Trump defunded that. Very good. Very good to defund that. Trump so far is doing a lot of good things. If you were objective about it and actually thinking, does the NIH need someone to kick the crap out of it and reform it? Absolutely. Does DEI and these modules gotta go? Absolutely. Should diversity be funded to say that poor people do worse than rich people, black people do worse than white people in myeloma over and over and over? No, we need solutions, or you gotta solve that problem. And a lot of that solution is not gonna come from medicine. It's gonna come from socioeconomics, from the economic and political sector. Trump so far, and WHO, do we have to withdraw? Yes, I'm sorry, Tedros, you should have run a study, man. What do you want? We gave you billions of dollars and you took sides, and you are a threat now to democracy, because at any time you could swoop in here and take a side on a political question. We don't know anymore, because I know you don't follow science. Science doesn't guide you, Tedros. So you are a liability, and you're an extra governmental, you're a foreign actor ultimately. You know, I would have loved to fund the good programs, and maybe we can pull some of those into our organizations, but we got to let you go. I'm sorry. You know, and so I am sympathetic that they do some good things. But on balance, these are necessary corrections. Now, if you win an election in 4 years, they can try to be corrected the other way, but you got 4 years where you're going to have to, you know, accept reality. I mean, that's what's happened. And the last point I'd make is that, you know, study sections being down for a week, like the average person on the street just does not care. They don't even know what happened. They don't care, and they don't know, and it's not a big deal. Just relax. Just relax. Have some balance. If you really do cry, the sky's falling all the time, people are not going to take you seriously if the sky actually does fall. So, just words of advice. Those are my thoughts. If you like this long video, I'm going to be posting that on YouTube. I'm going to try to put the clips out on Instagram and X, these other platforms, and send this video to a friend. You know, this is a way to build the channel against all odds. Send the video to a friend. Like, subscribe, and comment. I noticed that most of my videos get a lot of positive stuff, but you didn't like my video about cancer cures where I was critical of ivermectin febendazole. Well, I want to let you know something. There's a reason why you don't find me in my comment section, which is that I will not let you capture me. I'm not going to follow audience capture. I don't cater to what you want. I'm going to say what I believe. And you might agree with me 50% of the time, 60% of the time, 80% of the time, 90% of the time, but you might not agree with me all the time. That's okay. It's good that we still have this connection, even if you don't agree with me. But I don't want to be reading everything everyone says, because also you guys are all internally contradictory, but also I'm not going to let you frame my thinking. I have a certain way of thinking. I've honed it for many years. This is the way I think. This is what I believe. And I don't want to let any outside agency influence me, just like the WHO shouldn't influence us in the United States. So I'm not going to apologize for that video. I like that video. I think it's right. Single agent drug activity, I've been saying that for years. I've been saying all these things for years. All these things, even NIH reform, every single thing I talk to you about, I have been saying for years. People know from like 2007. He's been saying that for years. It's just that now finally other people care too. It's a very nice time for some of us who've been saying it for years. Well, like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Follow me on Instagram, on X. Go to www.drvinayprasad.com. www.drdrvinayprasad.com and subscribe, which actually puts us in touch, and you will get my Substack. And I'm going to be doing more videos, I hope, in the weeks and months to come. Keep writing my Substack. And then, of course, doing all the stuff I have to do, which is like actually write a lot of published research papers, which we're doing. I think we did like 50 last year, and run my clinic and do some other clinical activities and give a bunch of lectures and some good stuff going on in sensible medicine. I'm going to do some lecture series for all medical students, sort of a broad critical appraisal series. So until next time.